Hello friends, Matt here with Donut Requiescat. Today I want to talk about 5 reasons that I believe in God. I'm going through the 5 proofs or the 5 ways of Thomas Aquinas in another series, and some people find those convincing, some people don't. I have a lot of reasons I believe in God. Ultimately, I believe in God because I believe that He is there, because it's true that God exists. And as I go through these arguments, we're going to see what kind of God it is that I believe in. And so, here are 5 of those reasons, right? There are lots of reasons. Everything in the end points me to the existence of God. But here are 5 things that when I think about, I find particularly convincing. First of all is kind of a collection of the first 3 ways of Thomas Aquinas. It has to do with necessary and contingent being. I look at all the things around me, and none of these things have to exist. All of these things are contingent, or they're dependent on something else for their existence. They are dependent on other things to come into existence in the first place, and then nothing has the power in itself to sustain itself. Right? None of these things have to exist. If they had to exist, they would always exist. And if they had the essence of existence in them, then they would exist in their fullness, always. But everything that we see around us is changing. Even looking at the entire universe is changing, and it is a collection of contingent and dependent things. And the universe doesn't have the cause for its own existence within itself. Therefore, there must be some source of existence. All these other things that are dependent depend on something else. They need a cause, and that cause then has to be the fullness of existence. And that cause then has to be the fullness of existence. Pure actuality. And that thing has to exist because it is the essence of existence. And the essence of existence can't do otherwise than exist. So it doesn't need a creator, it doesn't need something else to bring it into existence. It exists by its very nature. The second thing that convinces me of the existence of God when I think about it is the nature and effectiveness of the human intellect. So, first of all, if the thoughts in my mind are nothing but the product of random interactions of material, then that means even my thoughts about the random interactions of nature are nothing but the result of random interactions of nature, right? If every human thought is just a random production of arrangement of atoms and chemical charges in my brain, then they are, in essence, no different from the arrangement of the sand on the seashore. And I wouldn't call that anything like understanding. Roger Penrose, in The Emperor's New Mind, has said that the ability to understand cannot be encapsulated in any algorithm. In other words, our minds have to be more than mere computers. And he goes into some even mathematical proofs as part of his argument for that. And so the human intellect is not just a computer. Right? We have this ability to understand, and we can think about things like numbers. Right? So taking a little bit of a different track here, we can think about numbers, we can think about mathematical objects. Those don't have any physical reality, right? We've never seen numbers. You've seen symbols that represent numbers, but you've never seen the numbers themselves. They are abstract entities. And so in order for us to know and understand abstract entities, those are effects, immaterial effects that require an immaterial cause. The immaterial cause for those immaterial effects, like understanding, numbers, is an immaterial soul. The immaterial soul, this thing that understands, has to have an immaterial cause as well. The effect cannot be greater than the cause. And that comes from this source of all actuality, God Himself, who is the source of intellect and understanding and truth. The third thing that when I look at, I can't deny the existence of God, is morality. Now, a lot of people have said, well, we can have morality, we can have moral standards without God, and that's true, we can have moral standards, but there's no sense of justice without God. So, for example, Democritus was an atheist, and he ascribed to virtue ethics, this idea that there's a particular nature that humans have, and when we live according to that nature, then we can achieve happiness, right? This fullness of being, living according to the essence that we have. And he's right. But then there's no appeal to a higher sense of justice. If somebody is treating me unjustly, I can appeal to him and say, well, you know, you should behave this way, you're just going to be unhappy. And then I'm only able to appeal to his happiness. He could say, well, I don't care about being happy. There's no higher sense of justice. There's nothing intrinsically wrong with the actions themselves if there is no God. We can agree as a society that certain things are wrong. We can appeal to people's sense of happiness and say, well, you're not going to be happy unless you act this way deep down inside. But there's no sense of justice. And the actions themselves are not intrinsically wrong. Right? We can make up systems of ethics and say that they're wrong, but the acts themselves are not intrinsically wrong if there is no God. And so I'm convinced that there's a God. And we see that this fullness of existence that we are trying to achieve in ourselves has to do with that actuality, the being that we have that we get from God. And so we owe to God being the best version of ourselves because our being comes from him. Right? Our being is given to him, and then it is just for us to render back to him our best selves. And in all of that, being our best selves and rendering that back to God and being in a right relationship with him, that is the source of our happiness. And that provides us with the moral standard. And it provides us with the moral standard that we can appeal to for everybody. If we tried to deny intrinsic rightness or wrongness, then what we end up with is we're denying this basic part of the human experience. People can say, oh yeah, well, everything is just opinion, it's whatever people want, but nobody actually behaves that way. We are all very upset when we hear about injustices that take place, when there's a genocide, rape, murder, torture. None of these things are intrinsically wrong if there is no God. But we all have this deep sense that there is intrinsic right and wrong. And so if we're going to take that data seriously instead of just trying to explain it away, then we have to appeal to a God and say that there is a God who exists. The fourth thing that convinces me of the existence of God when I think about it is beauty. People can find beauty, and they say that there's beauty in landscapes when they look around them in nature, but there's also beauty in things like stories. Or we can look at a story, we can look at poetry and say that these things are beautiful. Music, people appeal to beauty in music. And even mathematicians and physicists, they're the ones these days who won't shut up about beauty. And so beauty is an interesting thing because we see it in all these different places, right? In landscapes, in art, in music, and even in mathematics and physics. So then what is beauty? It's not in the things themselves, right? Because we don't take it apart, and it's in all these different kinds of things. And it's not just in us, because if that were the case, then it wouldn't be objective. People couldn't agree and look across the disciplines and say, oh, well, these are the standards of beauty, right? These are the aspects of beauty. And if we want to really call those things beautiful, then that beauty has to have some source. And those things are not intrinsically beautiful. The beauty and the art that's there have no intrinsic meaning if there is no God who can give meaning, this immaterial sense of value. But if we deny the intrinsic meaning and the intrinsic beauty in things, then again we're denying this basic part of the human experience, this thing that we all sense and experience in the world and in these different and varied ways. And so if we want to affirm the reality and the intrinsic meaning of beauty, then we have to admit that there's a God. If there is no God, then all the art, landscapes, the beauty in physics and mathematics are intrinsically meaningless. In themselves, they don't mean anything. They could mean something if we decide to give it to them, but then we're just making things up. And philosophy is a search for truth, the source of reality, not just what we want to attribute to things. The fifth most convincing thing for me for the existence of God is Jesus himself. The historical evidence for Jesus, for me, is overwhelming. I would recommend, if you're interested in looking at the historical evidence for Jesus, John P. Myers' series, A Marginal Jew, multi-volume work about the historical Jesus. But even from a historical perspective, we can come to the conclusion, certainly, that Jesus existed. Secondly, that he claimed to be God, right? He did things that only God could do, like forgiving sins, giving commands. He says, you heard it said, but I tell you. And then thirdly, he rose from the dead. If someone claims to be God, it's either true or false. If Jesus wasn't God, then we end up with this either liar or lunatic dilemma. But he doesn't appear to be either one of those. And the effect of the church after him doesn't seem to have that effect either, being the source of a liar or a lunatic. It looks like there is something truly there. And this person, Jesus, then, I'm convinced, has to be God himself. And if Jesus was a liar or a lunatic, then he wouldn't have been able to raise himself from the dead. And so Jesus shows us this God of pure actuality, of intelligence and truth, of goodness and of beauty, expresses himself to us in the love of Jesus. And so I put all those things together, along with, like I said, a lot of other pieces of evidence, and I cannot deny the existence of God. So thanks for watching. Please subscribe and share with your friends.